Hello, wonderful. This is Sarah, and I'm here with Sarah, actually. And we are going to be talking about how to help your kids when you can't control everything your kids are being exposed to, what they're going on in their life, maybe at a different parent's house, maybe at school, maybe wherever, because we love our babies so much. We love their sweet little brains, but
hmm
sometimes they get exposed to things that we can't control. Hello, Dr. Sarah Allen. How are you?
Hello. Thanks so much for having me, Sarah. It's nice to speak to a fellow Sarah, spelled perfectly, I might add, with an H on the end.
Spelled perfectly. And when Sarah and I connected, it was just like, oh, we want to talk about this. We want to talk about
hmm
this. We want to talk about this. So we're going to have her on again, but we've narrowed it down to at least a couple topics. And Sarah, tell people a little bit about your background and what you do.
Sure. So I'm a pediatric neuropsychologist, which really means that I help to bridge the gap, I guess, between brain and behavior sciences. So that's why my company is called Brain Behavior Bridge. And we really look at these brain behavior relationships. That's what I do mostly. So when we're talking about raising kids, I always talk about raising little brains, because to me, that's what I see when I look at a child or a teen or anybody, honestly, is the little brain inside of them and what we can do to help build those skills. And as you said, when you're raising kids that you can't control all those influences around them, that can get really hard when you're trying to make sure you're raising a good little brain.
Well, absolutely. And I want to point out that sometimes certain people in certain situations feel like they really can't control things.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk to like the all parents, they feel like they can't control things. And I do think that's worth mentioning. It's like, okay, everyone can't make sure everything's perfect for their kids and make sure they
Right.
are never harmed and make sure they're never exposed to anything. And it can be very frustrating if it's a grandparent or someone who, any circumstance where it's a close family member, it can be even more heightened or frustrating, or the other parent or the other parent's girlfriend or boyfriend,
Mm-hmm.
like, it's so frustrating. But I do think a good place to start in this conversation is nobody can control everything.
Right. And that's actually a good thing. I think what I see with the moms that I work with are the ones who grew up in environments where things were swept under the rug, where everything was fine, everything's great, let's not talk about it. Those are the ones that have the most trouble with understanding how they think and feel themselves, let alone teaching their children that. So when your kids are exposed to some difficult things, those are great learning experiences for them. And I know as moms, we want to control everything and keep them from bad things happening. But I mean, look at the pandemic. Didn't we all learn that we
Right.
just can't control everything? And so what we want to do is use those times as teachable moments and start to figure out it's kind of more of a supportive role, especially when you get to have teenagers, or in situations like mine. I'm from a divorced household, so what I had to learn really fast was that I can't control the parental influence all the time. It's not like it's just me that has some influence here. And so what I had to do is shift the way I parented to having more of a supportive role. And what do you do when to help your children manage it themselves, which is very different than I can control things that are happening in my household. And this also happens as your kids get to be teenagers, where there's lots of other influences in their lives. And if you try to control them, it will backfire. Let me just tell you, if you try to completely lock it down, that won't help. And two, we want to use these experiences for kids to help them start to realize what is a good thing that I want to experience more of, what is a bad thing and I don't want to, and how do I get myself out of those situations I don't like and I'm not stuck in them? How do I keep the ones that I do like? So we're really trying to teach them while we still have them around, right before they go off to living somewhere else. What can we do to help them navigate those relationships? And I think if you start to think about it like that, that becomes a little bit easier to start to see then, okay, so if I'm trying to teach them how to navigate things on their own, that's a different approach than me trying to save them and yank them back from everything.
And I have worked with a lot of women. Okay. I have never heard of any human say, my parents micromanaged everything and controlled everything, and I'm super grateful for it. Right. And
That's
so
true. Yeah.
as parents, like we have to find that balance and that flexibility and equilibrium. And it's really scary and terrible when we're worried about our kids.
Yes.
But the choice is either empower them to do it on their own or try to micromanage everything for them. And there's a pretty clear distinction on what the results are going to be long term and how they're going to feel about you as a parent.
And there's no learning in micromanaging. That's you imparting your stuff on them, and it's not them learning to build these skills. And listen, it's hard. It's very hard. We're not saying that it's easy by any stretch of the imagination. And the gray is really difficult. Black and white is a lot easier, but the world isn't black and white. And you want your kids to be able to make these decisions. And that's why I keep harping on that. What do you want for their growth? How do you want their little brains to turn out? And when you think about that, I think that's where it starts to make this big mind shift. Like you're saying, micromanaging and controlling, that's not a teaching tool. That doesn't help them. And that's why you don't hear people say later, oh, I really love that they did that. You might hear, oh, I like that they asked me more questions about that party, or I'm glad that they said no to this or something. Boundaries are great, but micromanaging and withholding is not great. And what happens is kids then tend to grow up, maybe they go to college or they get into the workplace, and then they kind of try to explore all these things, but they don't have the soft place to land at that point. And so now you're really pushing them to not learn, throw them out there. And then that's when you have a little bit more of an issue. If they can mess up, because we want them to, right? You mess up, I mess up. We have good days, we have bad days. And actually it was so interesting because I heard a wonderful podcaster who's a teenager who talks to parents about what it's like as a teenager.
Oh,
and
how cool. Yeah.
Right, it's so cool. One of the things that she was saying is that teens are allowed to have bad days too. Why can't they have a bad day too? Right. And so, we're trying to help them figure out, okay, you have a bad day. How do you manage that? And how do you manage that without kicking the people in your world, which they're likely to do?
Yeah. Well, and I want to go back to what you talked about sweeping things under the rug. Okay. Because what I see pretty often is a family dynamic where somebody was sweeping something under the rug. And then the mom comes to me and she's talking to me like, well, what do I do about protecting my kid from this? And it's like, okay, so you're asking me how to ethically sweep things under the rug for your kid. Is that what I'm hearing from you? And they're like, they laugh, they're just like, okay. I was like, there's either the truth or there's hiding the truth. Now, you want the middle option of how can I change the truth where this person isn't toxic, where they're not doing scary things or, manipulative things. Where's the option that there's nothing, that I can choose where, there's nothing to tell about the truth. And it's like, that doesn't exist.
Right.
So you can either sweep things under the rug, ignore, or tell the truth.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, again, teaching them how to handle that truth, how do you do this? What do you do with those things? I think is really, really important. And you also have some situations where one parent might want to sweep under the rug and the other one may not. Whether that's in two different households or even sometimes in the same household. And, that's a difficult situation too. I'm very upfront in my parenting, both in my clinical practice and in my own personal parenting. And I think that these are the things that need to be talked about. Kids need to learn coping and adaptive skills. They need to learn emotion skills, and we expect them to have them right away, but especially in like teenagehood, even before, my daughter is 11 going on 16. I always say she's always, you would think that she was a 16-year-old, and she has a lot of trouble with emotions, just like every other girl around her age. And so first she'll sometimes do something or be manipulative or be toxic even towards me or towards her friends or other people in the world without having any understanding of the fact that she's having an emotion that's feeding into that. And so when you see that toxic behavior, I often say, especially with kids talk with their behavior. So if they're doing those things, there's usually some steps before that. And most of the time, from what I find, they can't always connect all those dots. So a lot of times as parents, we have to put boundaries down on the toxic behavior while also then helping to teach the things that are leading up to that. So they are learning how to shift it, because one of the issues that we see with kids is they might have these behaviors. And also, by the way, kids try lots of things on, right? I'm sure you've seen this. So they might try on somebody's behavior that's very toxic that we don't like. Then they might try something that's a little too far the other direction for them. And they're going to keep changing. They don't have stable personalities at this point. We want them to try different things on and figure out what they want from each one. Right. So boundaries down the toxic behaviors, but don't forget about the skills that they need to build, because they probably don't even know why they behave that way. And you have to go backwards from, okay, when you behave that way, that means you must be having a reaction to something that happened or an emotion. And this is how we can tell what that emotion is. And you start with just labeling that emotion, whatever that emotion is, and starting to attach it to those thoughts and behaviors. And so we miss that part sometimes when we're so, so looking forward to putting those boundaries down, or so don't have boundaries down that we're getting kicked so much emotionally, we can't separate those things.
And that can happen a lot if there's been a situation the kids don't feel like they are in control, right? Or you feel out of control and they've been out of your space, whether maybe they're being bullied at school, maybe they're being, something along those lines, and then they come back to you. And then it all falls apart, right? So how can we be supporters of our children with the things we can't control?
Oh, I love this question. And again, I think from personal experience for me, this has happened when I got divorced and I couldn't control the other environment. I see this a lot with my clients in the teenage years when you have, or even honestly, earlier than that, when you start to have friends. I actually just sent out an email about what to do when you're not the center of your child's universe anymore, because there is this shift that happens once they get older. And I think the first thing to realize is that there's two different.
I'm going to stop you right there. I cannot move away from that without saying that's what's supposed to happen.
Yes.
I just want to say,
right.
That's what's supposed to happen. And my son's 11 now, my daughter's 9, and it's really changed their activities, their friends, their world. And my son in particular, man, he and I are so close. We are just peas from the same pod, But he's 11. He doesn't want to sit on my lap. Of course he doesn't. He's not wanting to cuddle me anymore. He's not wanting me to put him to bed at night. He's not supposed to. He's 11.
Right. Now, I know. And as a mom, it's but at the same, and it happens sometimes quickly. Mine are 10 and 11. My boy's younger, my daughter's older. And it happens sometimes all of a sudden. I remember my son just said something to me the other day and I said, I didn't know you did that. I just didn't know. I didn't know I didn't know something that he did that day, and it's this, the shift is starting to happen. Right.
And the shift that's supposed to happen. Otherwise you have kids who are, there's a reason there's a movie called Failure to Launch, and that's a problem, right? Good parenting is launching at some point.
Right. And I think there is, it's a recognition of that shift, definitely. And also kind of getting to know that your kids are going to change. I think it's very helpful, especially when I'm having a particularly tough time with my kids, or I'm reminding parents that I see that this happens to. There are phases and stages, right? So if you're having a really particularly tough time with your kid right now, just remember, talk to a bunch of other moms that have some older kids, or just to give yourself that perspective that, yes, like you said, it's supposed to happen, but also that things shift and change. So you get them back at times. If you've lost them completely, you feel like you've lost them completely, keep going, keep trudging through. We'll help you. We'll talk about it in a minute, what you can do. And they're going to come back. You just have to keep, as long as you're stable, you're there no matter what. You can still put up boundaries and still be there no matter what. So you can say, I'm not going to accept this behavior, but I still love you. I'm still here. I'm still your mother. I'm still doing these things for you. And you just solidly stay there. They will come back.
And if anyone is really why isn't Sarah asking her more questions about setting boundaries with her teen? That's what our next podcast interview is going to be on, because I can hear some things that you're saying that our listeners are like, wait, what? Why isn't she, And so I do want to say that's going to be the next episode with Sarah, and you can see exactly why I asked her to speak to us twice. So both in supporting your kids and then setting boundaries with teens. So
back to supporting
from a brain perspective, right? So what are some practices more parents should be doing to create that support system, to have their kids be their own support system?
Yeah. So I love this because I'm always on independence, and like you said, launching, right? Where our point is launching, our point is getting kids to do things themselves. And so what you really want to do is start thinking about your kids like a little brain. And you want to start first, I would say, when it comes to developing coping and adaptive skills, because I think that's really important to prevent toxic behavior in them, and also to help them learn how to manage toxic behavior if it's happening towards them, right? Because we want to give them those skills when they have really good, solid understanding of who they are, understanding of how to to shift and to pivot and to understand other people's behavior and deal with hard things, that's good. That's a good foundation for dealing with toxic people if they're getting bullied or if these other things are happening to them, or if they're involved with adults, like you mentioned before, in their lives that are being toxic towards them. These are good skills to have. So the first thing you want to do is kind of get to know your kid's little brain. So there's probably two major categories when it comes to emotions. I always say emotions are better out than in. I'm talking about emotions. I know Shrek talks about something else, but I talk about emotions here. So better out versus in, right? But some kids are more in than out, and some kids are more out than in. So I have one kid who is totally out. When he starts acting ornery, or, something's happening or he's not listening, I know there's some emotion, something's going on, and we got to go explore that. Easy one for me. He's an easy, it's like, here, mom, let me just give you all this stuff on a silver platter and let you know that I need some help. Now, my daughter is completely different. She's more of an inward. So when she gets grumpy, or when she stops talking or turns in, or just is a jerk, I can't say it anyway, like she kind of just is nasty, that
middle school girls can be jerks.
That's so weird. I know.
Sarah, you're just exaggerating for our audience.
Yeah, it's just a stage. It's just a stage. That was more for me than for any of you. But when those things happen, she goes in and you can't get a stitch out of her most of the time. So I want to talk about her because she's actually, anyone who's an in, not an out, is almost harder. The outs are very loud and they're easy, sometimes they're easier to put boundaries down around. The ins are a little bit tough because they don't know how they're feeling. This is the thing I've learned about people, kids who keep it in. And you have to really go back to start to teach them how they feel before you can teach them how to understand how they're feeling and cope and adapt and all of those kinds of things. So the first thing they need to learn is how to label that feeling, but that is so far to the one side. All we have right now is you're not being very nice, right? And quietly not very nice, maybe not talking, not engaging, and then just kind of snippy comments, any of those kinds of things. And you say, what's wrong? Nothing. What's happening? I don't know. I'm fine. All of those are all you're in kind of kids. So what you need to do first is what I call throwing spaghetti at a wall. Just say, label that behavior. I notice that you're not being very kind. And when you're not very kind, I know that there's something going on or you're not feeling. And they'll, no, God, mom, why do you always say this? Right? You just keep going. Sometimes I feel that way when my friends are mean to me. Sometimes I feel that way when I'm really busy or when I'm worried about something. Is it possible that it's this? Is it possible that it's that? Now, I made that sound really easy, but that can be a conversation at night when it's dark and no one can see each other. That can be a little one in the car as she's staring out the window and you are driving. You pick your times, and it might be a series of conversations where you just keep trying. That's why I call it throwing spaghetti at a wall. Just keep throwing it, see what sticks, and then something eventually will stick. Whether that means she says, absolutely, mom, you're actually the best mom in the whole wide world, and you've come up with a solution to my problem. Or more likely, you hear her on the phone with a friend and she says, I just really don't like it when Susie talks to me like that. And you're like, ha, ha, ha. I've gotten it. So you want to go back to labeling that feeling. And once you can kind of help her do that, just keep saying, you have this again. Are you having a feeling? Do you know what that feeling is? Is it possible it's this? And just keep that wording going for a little while. You'll start to see her say to you, I'm really nervous about this. Or, my friends aren't being very nice. Once she starts giving you words back, that's great, because now we can work with that. But with the inners, they don't have the words. So you have to give it to them. You just have to keep going, keep trying. And then you can connect it to the behavior. So then once you figure out what it was, last time this happened, you were really upset with your friends, or you were really nervous about going into school for this reason. Is that, what's going on? So if that's the key, you can say I'm nervous, but you can't yell and scream at me. Right. And so that's a little bit of a different with an inner than with an outer, who you can first say, you can't yell and scream at me, but you can talk to me. They already have a better sense usually than the inners,
Well, and you said something brilliant that I don't want to gloss over about, sometimes I feel that way when my friends are upset, or sometimes I feel that way when parents talk about their own vulnerabilities, kids open their ears.
Yes. And actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because it is the place to start, is to just model it. Because if you have a real kid that's really inside, or they're really in the teenage years, you might just need to have the words around them. They might not even let you approach them with some of this stuff yet. So, I call this growth mindset and, good emotional modeling, good emotional understanding. You have to live and breathe that. That's why we were talking about people who swept things under the rug when they were younger. If you were one of those moms who grew up in a household where things were swept under, you might have to work a lot on identifying your own emotions. So thank you, Sarah, for reminding me of that and for bringing that back up, which is just, you need to start to model it yourself. Just start talking out loud about how you feel, or when you yell at them, start to say, I yelled. I think it's because I am just really frustrated. And I just was talking to grandmom and she was talking about the holiday season and we couldn't come up with plans and she drives me crazy. And then that just makes me angry. And it just makes me have, a lower tolerance for you guys not listening. And those things you have to keep going. And the more you try to do that, your kids listen. I swear to you, they do. And my mother used to tell me that they'll hear you in your head and you just keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. And then if you pay attention every once in a while, you will hear it back. I promise. And that's when you're doing it. But yes, so even further back from the process I discussed was just doing it for yourself and having those conversations. And even if you have a partner in the house you're raising with, doing it as you communicate. I said communicate in quotes for those who couldn't see me, because, sometimes it might be an argument, but even if that argument is based on feeling words and identifying how each other, what you're trying to say, the more you work on those relationships in front of your kids, the more they will start to use those tools themselves.
Agree completely. And I joke and say leading by example is the one thing women don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Can I send my kid to a camp? Can I do this? Can I get them this therapist? Can I do this? Can I do this? You can model emotional health.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I don't know about that, Sarah, and it's just really because you have to become the forefront.
Yeah.
At some point, like you have to take time for rest. Yeah.
It's a great point. I think sometimes I say to parents, and it may sound a little bit harsh, but you can't pay someone to fix your kid. You actually can do this because your ability to be there very consistently is more effective than the once a week or trying to translate those things. The reason I started working with kids originally and not adults is because when I was working in brain injury rehab, actually, and adults kind of had their own pattern. There was no constant cure there to help them build up these brain skills. But as parents, we get to, let me say that again. We get to help our children with these things. And, they don't give you that manual when you have kids and just say, here's the way to go. But we're starting to realize this more and more, I think, especially, our generation and the generation under us of people having kids, is we're realizing we need to do a lot of self-help work. We're trying to figure out who we are. The pandemic showed us this, that, wait a minute, am I happy in my job? Am I not? Am I happy with my relationships? Am I not? We started to look inward. Now, what if you can help your kids start that really early and build these things up? Maybe they won't have to shift everything that they're doing when they get to be adults. They'll be able to kind of make these small shifts along the way. So the impact you can have as a mom by modeling is huge. And you're right, it is hard and it is an investment. But the reason if you're one of those moms listening saying like, nothing works, I've tried everything, it just doesn't work. The reason it's probably not working is because you haven't jumped into that short-term investment for the long-term gain. So if you really went all in right now and you decided, I'm going to make these major changes with myself, and forget your kids for a minute, just with yourself, you're going to start to see the change in your kids and you're going to be able to build on that. And that's when you're going to see the change you want to see. And if you do it now, then it will get easier in the long run. If you keep band-aiding with other things, you're not going to see that change. I think it's a great point, Sarah. Yeah.
And so common, and so sad for us. It's like, we know what works. It's this, this works. And people are like, yeah, but I had someone, they had read a book on building self-esteem in kids. And they said, I got so mad at that book because it said I had to have self-esteem. And I was like, yes, I bet it did.
Yeah. It's tough. We want to just throw money at it, or we want to just ask somebody else or make the schools do it or all those things. And it's a hard realization to realize that, you got yourself into this kid thing. But P.S., we keep talking about the fact, I know you don't want to do it, but the benefit to you is so huge. It's bigger. It's as big, if not bigger for you than it is for your children. And it brings you closer to your kids, all those things you want, less yelling, less screaming, less behavior problems, less lying, less, tension in the home, a better relationship with your kids, increased time with them, the desire to want to be with your kids and for your kids to want to be with you. All of those things come when you take that journey. And, Sarah, I'm just coming off doing this big launch for my course. And I can tell you that is one of the biggest hurdles that I hear from women is, they're really great if, they can put their kids on a Zoom and we can work together. But when the topic is, hey, this is really something that you have to start with and put this short-term investment in for the long-term gain in yourself, that's where I think women really struggle. And, it does feel like sometimes just another thing on your plate of things to do. But, all those things they tell you to do, like go relax, stop being so stressed and give your kids this and give your kids that, make sure they're involved in sports. Don't let them do these things, let them do these things. You can throw all that out the window and just focus on starting with yourself and you understanding your emotions and learning some communication tools and this growth mindset. And you can forget all the other things because then everything starts to fall into place. So it's almost like we're doing all these other things we think we should do, the shoulds, right? But really, if we just start back from a basic, it's one thing to focus on and it fixes all these other things.
And, I have a daughter, you have a daughter. What I ask is, well, at what age does she expire? Right now, she's worth investing in. Private tumbling lessons, this, that, whatever. At what point does she age out and she's no longer investing, worth investing in?
Right.
And it's only her children that are worth investing in. And I just want to ask people, at what point does your daughter age out?
Right.
And they look horrified. And I was like, well, what point did you age out?
Right.
You're modeling. At some point you grow up and then your hobbies, interests, physical, emotional health are no longer important. And then we wonder why kids are on antidepressants or while our birth rates are declining because these kids don't want to have kids.
Right. And our suicide rates are increasing. Let's just say it, and so and that's above middle schoolers and up that we're seeing. And it's because kids don't have good emotional understanding, coping, adaptive skills. We don't want the midlife crisis. We want you to be able to build up. And so not to say that you don't shift and change and pivot, but that you can do that with good mental health. And I think it's really important. I love the way that you put that. And I can also add to that I think it's a lot easier to start with your kids when they are, before teenager or during teenage. Once they get older, look at you. You don't want to change either, right? As a mom, you're having a hard enough time changing because you've already been so set in your ways. So if you can model this for your kids younger, it's going to be a lot easier to shift those things up. So if you're a mom of kids like 11 and younger, you've got it's probably a rock star chance of getting it to happen fairly quickly. If you are about 12 and older, you still want to do this, probably even more so than the younger age, but you are going to have to work hard for yourself. You're going to have to work hard for your kids because they've started to develop some of these habits. So, I always love to get those habits in younger. Now that doesn't mean you stop 11. You're like, woohoo, I did it. You're gonna have to keep building on them. But remember, as your kids get older, that you're now working on changing habits instead of growing them up with certain habits. And I say that, but my daughter's also 11, as I said before. And although we're not breaking habits, we're still going through, we have a great foundation, but there's still a lot of challenges, especially as she has other influences in her life. But, it's steady the course through that can be a little easier than having to wait till she's tried all that stuff and then have to pull back to try to teach those skills.
So much harder. So if our kids are in a situation that we worry about them being in, what kind of conversations do you recommend having?
Honest, open ones. So, don't sweep under the rug, don't pretend that it's okay when it's not. So let's just use a party, for example. I mean, even my daughter just asked me to go to a party the other weekend. And I said, that's great. I just need to talk to the parents. I want to make sure you're okay and comfortable. I'm worried about these other influences on you. You know that there are kids who use substances. There are kids who, when their parents are not around, do things that, I might not approve of. Sometimes I often throw in the birds and the bees just because it makes her cringe. So it's always fun for me to see her go, oh, Mom. But these are conversations that we want to have. And I think that that's the way to do it. How do you feel about this? What do you think is going to be there at this party? Do you feel comfortable going? Would you as a mom feel comfortable letting your child go to that? What could you
Okay, that's my
experience
favorite
there?
question.
Mhm.
I want to zero in on that because that's what I ask my kids all the time. They hate it. I'm like, well, when you're a parent, what choice are you going to make?
Right.
And they instantly back down and
Right.
act in their higher self.
Well, and it's true. It is a great trick. Like as a clinician, it's one that I use with little kids all the time. What would your teacher say to me? Like,
Mhm.
oh, do you have any trouble in school? No. Well, what would your mom say? Well, she would say that maybe I do. What would your teacher say? Well, she'd say I yell at her a lot. I'm like, okay, there's the answer. So it's a great one to kind of flip that script
Mhm.
and try to get them to see from a different perspective. But again, you're teaching them how. So if you have a teenager that wants to go to a party, let's just use that example, then asking those questions. Okay, so what do you think is going to happen at that party? What kinds of things would be there? What are you going to do if, right? Because then you can decide, do I want to let them go? But we've talked about some things they can do, or do I want to restrict them so much? And maybe they end up getting their way out there anyway. Maybe they pretend to sleep over a friend's house at some point and decide to go
Mhm.
anyway, but then you've never been able to have those conversations with them about what to do. Because I can tell you, teenagers think that they know everything and that they are awesome at anything that comes up. But when something does come up and they don't know what to do, embarrassment takes over. They feel pressured and pushed in, and they haven't thought of ways to get out of situations that they might like. And now they're stuck. And that's the things you don't want for your kids. So I would
So
recommend
how
asking questions.
so how do you get, even not at a party, say they're co-parenting. I have a situation, there was a woman and her co-parent would take the children to parties. So this
Mm.
wasn't like a situation the kids could control. He was having parties in his house with all these,
Mhm.
and she's like, well, I don't want to bash their dad, but there's like cocaine rolling through the house with my kids there. Like,
Yeah.
what are some any strategies for conversation around something like that?
Yeah, I think this is a great example, and this can be a long way. This could be even something as simple as I go to the co-parent's house and there's things that I don't want to be around there, even if it's lots of fighting or other things like that. So it can be as extreme as cocaine, or as, I don't want to say mild, but on the other end of the spectrum, things they don't want to be around that, they need to get away from. And I think it's worth saying this behavior is not okay. This is not a behavior that is first of all, with cocaine, it's illegal, and if it's anything else, it can be, treating somebody like this isn't okay. This is called, and you can label it, whether it's called gaslighting, which we've been given lots of terms for, whether it is abusive in nature, whether it, whatever it is, labeling that behavior is important. And then saying, okay, so in your case, this is your father. So you can still love your father and you can still have whatever level of relationship you want with him. But these behaviors that are being done are not okay. So what can we do to help you get away from those? So if you're going to a party, are there places you can go that are quiet, or places you can get away from that? Or can you put your headphones on and go in another room? What can you do about this? And if you really don't feel comfortable there and you want to leave, are there ways that you can advocate for yourself that make you feel comfortable? What would those look like? And if you notice, these are all one, questions, and two, supportive role. You're playing a supportive role and helping them figure out how to one, label, because I think that labeling of the toxic behavior is really important, and how to feel, because if it's a kid with a parent in particular, one of the biggest issues is, but I love them. Right. And so, but I love them, but they have toxic behavior. And we deal with this as adults all the time. If you're in a bad relationship, you might say, but I love them, so I'm going to stay, or, but I love them, but I left. Either way, but you have to separate the behavior from that emotion. So I think with kids, it's really helpful to say, this is your dad. You love your dad, but these are the behaviors that you're seeing, that you're telling me aren't okay, or that we're experiencing that aren't okay. You can still love them and still not like the things that they do. So when these things happen, what can you do that will help you in that scenario? Maybe you can't leave the party, or you can't run away from it, but is there another location? Could you go into the basement? Could you ask to go to a friend's house? Could you bring a friend over? What are some things that you can do to help you manage that? So now I have much more of a supportive role, and we're figuring out what they can actually do in that environment that is going to be helpful and supportive of them building that independent and advocacy skills, so that if they're ever in those situations as they get older and they do have more say in where they want to be and how they want to be there, they know what to do.
And I really liked that you said the behaviors you see
Mm-hmm.
versus the behaviors I think I should point out.
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And that is worlds of difference. If a child comes and says, I see this, I hear this, within my own work of helping people become toxic person proof, what do your eyes see? What do your ears hear? Gaslighting is teaching you not to believe in what you see and hear.
Mm-hmm.
The more I can strengthen for the people in my life, the more I can strengthen, oh, that really did happen.
Yeah.
Oh, your eyes are not lying to you. Oh, your ears are not lying to you. Oh, you were right on that. That's an easier conversation than, well, don't you know that your grandfather's doing this? Or don't you know that your aunt's doing this? Or don't you
Right.
know, versus, oh, what did you see? What did you hear? And even that questioning of, getting them to open their eyes and ears, even if they haven't seen it yet, it
Yeah.
creates enough of an interest that they start looking later.
And I think you want to keep emotion out of that. You can have emotion. We want emotion. We've been talking a lot about that. But when it comes to those conversations, if you are to, don't you know they do this all the time? Can't you
Mm-mm.
see this? That's going to shut down a conversation, not open it up. And your kids might say something to you like, in this kind of divorce house, I don't know who's lying, right? Or you say one story and they say another story. If you say, well, what, you don't believe me, and blah, 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 that's going to shut the conversation down. If you can say, I understand what you're saying, I could see how that could be frustrating. And that's probably really hard to be in your position. What are you, like you said, what are you seeing? How could you decide what to do here? And that helps them kind of figure out, okay, well, maybe I'll look at some of the evidence of things that are happening. And then he can say, well, they said this, but then I saw this. Okay. So what do you think that is? And that's a behavior we call and people experience. And so you're kind of pushing that out of you and having it out in the open. And it also pushes it out from them, because we know with these toxic behaviors that you can internalize them very much and think they're because of you, or kids think they're because of them. And so you really want to help to bring them outside and say, this is this type of behavior. And also try not to label, because they're going to go through these periods, especially if it's somebody who's emotionally connected, whether that be a father, a mother, an aunt, somebody biologically connected, like that. They're going to keep, it's that, and I said it before, but the love versus the behaviors, or the like that, to help kids understand. It's such an abstract concept that you might, still see them as your mom, but there still be issues there with the ways that they act, and that you can kind of pull those things away a little bit, helps to kind of give that more objective viewpoint versus getting involved in the emotional ones. And I say that to anybody who's had a toxic relationship in your life. You have gone through likely a process of trying to figure out, was it you? Is it them? What could you do? And these are kids, so they're struggling even more so. So labeling those things and those behaviors so that they know what toxic is really valuable.
In my new book, that's not out yet, but it's talking about emotional problems to solve and practical problems to solve. And I'm so glad you talked about like separating those out, because not enough people are talking about it. It does all end up spaghetti. You're talking about throwing spaghetti in the wall, but it does end up spaghetti and jumbled. And it's like, okay, there's an emotion and there's a problem. Right? And we can have both can be running simultaneously on two tracks. But what happens is sometimes I think we create like a T shape, like the emotion goes over the practical problem to solve, and then we get stuck, or we get indecisive, or we get our kids like, well, what am I supposed to do? I love, my grandfather, but I can't do this, or whatever it is,
What you just said, like, I love my grandfather, but I can't do this. That's a very difficult thing to get to. As you just mentioned, you wrote a whole book about it. You have tons of clients who have to go through this process. This goes all the way back to something we were talking earlier, which is just teaching emotion and communication language and coping skills, right? So if you don't have those skills in the first place, and let's say you as a mom have grown up with some toxic relationships around you, and now you're trying to shift those for your children, just remember how difficult this process has been for you, and start back with just, if you understand how you think and feel, the rest of these things will come into place, but you have to build on that skill. So if you really don't even understand how you think or feel to begin with, then how do you know what's you, what isn't you, what behaviors are good, what isn't good? So it really comes down to those foundation skills, and that's what I focus on in Raising Brains, is really just building those foundations so that you can apply these things to things like what you do with the toxic people in your life.
Well, Dr. Sarah Allen, please tell people where they can find out more about you and your book and your work.
Yeah, so you can always go to my website. It's brainbehaviorbridge.com. That has all up-to-date information about what's going on right now, a lot of media, other podcast things, and of course, my book, which is called Raising Brains. And I call it a mindful meddling approach to raising happy, successful, connected kids, because as we're talking about, we're not saying don't meddle. We're just saying do it in a way that's going to help to build skills and independence. And then, of course, if you want a little bit more of a fun community, you can go to mybraingal.com, because people call me the brain gals because they can't say neuropsychologist most of the time. And inside that group, I do a lot of lives. I answer people's questions, and you'll, of course, get information. And then, as we were talking about, if you're one of these moms that's been listening and have decided, you know what, I am ready for that investment. I want to do this and model this for my kids and start to do it with me, but also to teach them. You can check out information on brainbehaviorbridge.com as well for my course, which we're now running on demand specials for you. So you can go take a look at that.
Awesome. Well, Sarah, thank you for helping us on our journey to becoming toxic person proof.